My aunt asked me how my love life was going. Just 7 words, casually tossed into a conversation while she poured herself a cup of coffee. I smiled, shrugged, said, "It's fine," and quickly redirected. But inside, I froze. Not because it wasn't fine, but because I had no idea how to explain what it had become. I've always liked my aunt. She's the only one in my family who actually listens, really listens. The kind of person who looks you in the eye and waits for your real answer. She didn't push it, just gave me that soft nod, like she knew there was more beneath the surface. And there was. I used to think my relationship was solid. We met 6 years ago at a concert. It was one of those cliché meet cuties. We bumped into each other in line, shared drinks, made each other laugh. 1 month in, we were inseparable. 2 years later, we moved in together. The first few years were what everyone hopes for: laughter, road trips, lazy Sundays, sex that felt electric and connected. We supported each other's dreams. We had little rituals, inside jokes. It felt like home. But now, home feels like a waiting room. Sterile, quiet, awkward. The change was slow, like watching paint peel. It started with the silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that felt loaded. I'd ask how their day was, and I'd get one-word answers. I thought maybe they were just tired or stressed with work. But it wasn't that. It was something else. They started going to bed earlier. They'd say they were just exhausted, and I'd come in and see them scrolling their phone, screen turned away from me. I didn't want to be that person. The one who gets paranoid. Who snoops. Who starts fights over vibes. So I kept giving the benefit of the doubt. They'd go out more, sometimes late. Friends I didn't know. Plans I wasn't invited to. When I asked, they'd brush it off. It's just a coworker thing. Or you wouldn't know them. I try to be okay with it. I told myself relationships evolve. People get comfortable. Maybe the passion just needed reigniting. I planned a weekend away. Somewhere quiet, just the two of us. I booked the Airbnb, picked their favorite wine, even printed out the dumb little playlist we used to play when we first dated. But they forgot they had a work trip. That weekend I stayed home, drank the wine alone, and watched old photos on my phone, trying to remember how we got here. There was this one night 2 months ago that still plays in my head. We were watching a movie. Nothing serious, just background noise. I looked over at them and felt like I was looking at a stranger. I couldn't remember the last time they reached for my hand, or kissed me without me initiating it, or asked me how I was really doing. I remember blurting out, "Do you still love me?" They laughed, not cruelly, just awkwardly. Said, "Of course I do. Don't be weird." Then went back to their phone. But something in me cracked that night. I started watching more closely, noticing things. A password change on their phone. Turning away when a notification popped up. A name that kept repeating in stories. Just a friend from work. The same name. Always. I told myself I trusted them. But I didn't. Not really. And maybe it wasn't even about cheating at that point. It was about being erased. About feeling like I was no longer part of their story. Like I was a chapter they had outgrown but hadn't figured out how to end. I thought about leaving. More than once. But then I'd remember the early days. How they used to hold me like I was fragile. How they'd make coffee exactly how I liked it. The texts in the middle of the day saying they miss me. The way they used to look at me like I was everything. I kept hoping that person would come back. But love doesn't always leave loudly. Sometimes it slips out quietly, one day at a time, and by the time you realize it's gone, you're sitting across from someone who feels like a roommate with shared bills and mismatched schedules. When my aunt asked me that question, I realized I didn't even know the answer. My love life. It wasn't good. It wasn't bad. It was just a slow, silent storm I hadn't told anyone about. A secret unraveling. I didn't tell her all that, of course. I just smiled. But something about that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it was the first time in a long time someone really saw me. Or maybe because I was finally starting to admit to myself that something was deeply, irreversibly wrong. It was just one question. But it made everything I'd been avoiding echo a little louder. And for the first time, I couldn't pretend I didn't hear it. The night after that conversation with my aunt, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wide awake beside someone I used to know. Something in me had shifted. I didn't want to just survive this strange limbo. I needed answers, even if I wasn't ready for them. I started noticing the pattern. The phone was always face down. Silent mode became standard. They'd flinch slightly when I walked in unexpectedly. There were late work meetings that didn't show up on the calendar. Names that never came with stories. I wasn't searching for proof. I was swimming in clues, just afraid to connect them. I tried to tell myself I was overthinking. But doubt is like water in your shoes. You can pretend it's nothing, but eventually it slows you down, changes how you move. I became quieter around them. I started watching, not speaking. Their laugh changed, lighter, more animated on the phone. But never with me. They dressed differently too. More effort, new colognes, better hair days, but only when they said they were going out with the team. I brought it up once. Asked, carefully, if everything was okay between us. They scoffed. Why wouldn't it be? I said, I just felt distance. They shrugged. You're probably just stressed. Work's been a lot for both of us. Then they kissed my forehead and went back to texting someone. I started checking things. It wasn't proud or planned. It was instinct. They left their laptop open one morning. I didn't dig far, just the tabs. A name I didn't recognize. Searched it. Instagram. Private account, no bio. Barely any followers. But the name matched one I'd heard once, in a throwaway comment. Someone from accounting. That person suddenly had weight. My stomach dropped. I didn't even have proof yet, but I knew. Still, I kept showing up. Making dinner. Asking about their day. Pretending I wasn't falling apart. I started journaling. Writing down every little thing. Dates, behaviors, inconsistencies. It wasn't just about them anymore. It was about not losing my grip on reality. I needed to know I wasn't imagining it. A close friend noticed something was off. I confessed bits. How I felt, what I suspected. They looked at me, serious. You don't sound paranoid. You sound alone. That hit hard. Because I was. Every day I lived with someone who used to be my person, but now I was just part of their cover story. One night, I heard them on the phone in the other room, speaking low, then laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months. I didn't move. I just listened, not to the words but the tone. It was the way they used to sound with me. That soft, flirty energy. It wasn't for me anymore. Later, I asked who they were talking to. Just a friend, they said casually. You don't know them. I asked if it was the person from accounting. Their face didn't even flinch. Just a smooth. Why would you even ask that? That was all it took. Not the denial. The calm. The way they didn't even have to think about the lie. It was rehearsed. That's when the anxiety settled in. Deep, gnawing. I stopped sleeping properly. Started dreaming of confrontations that never happened. My mind played out fake scenarios where I caught them red-handed. But every morning I woke up to the same hollow routine. The mask. The pretending. I wanted to believe it was just emotional cheating. That maybe it hadn't crossed that final line. But the emotional betrayal was already complete. They shared things with someone else. Jokes, thoughts, time, secrets. The intimacy I used to have was now being rerouted elsewhere. And I was still here, clinging to scraps. I kept thinking about how love slowly curdled. We used to dance in the kitchen. Now we barely made eye contact while passing each other. We used to binge shows together. Now they'd already watched episodes without me. Little things, tiny deaths of connection, piling up. I caught myself apologizing for things I didn't do, walking in too quietly, asking too many questions, needing too much. I hated that. I hated becoming smaller, trying not to trigger suspicion for asking about what I had every right to know. I remember sitting in the car one day, parked outside the grocery store, not ready to go home. Just sitting there, gripping the wheel, wondering what my next move was. I didn't want to be that person who stayed just because leaving was hard. But the silence was easier than the confrontation. And I still didn't have absolute proof. But something was cracking. Slowly. I stopped caring if they noticed I was different. I stopped laughing at their jokes. I stopped initiating anything. I let the distance grow because I needed space from the version of them I no longer trusted. I started preparing myself for the truth. Quietly, mentally. I knew I couldn't keep doing this. I told myself, when the moment comes, don't freeze. Don't beg. Don't negotiate with someone who already made you an option. Every night felt like a countdown. Not to an explosion, but a slow collapse. And even without the final blow, I knew, whatever we had, it wasn't love anymore. It was a performance, and I was no longer willing to play my role. It happened on a Thursday. Nothing special about the day itself, but I woke up with a heaviness in my chest like something was about to shift. Their phone buzzed around 6:30 a.m. while they were in the shower. Usually I wouldn't touch it, but this time, I didn't hesitate. I picked it up and, for some reason, it wasn't locked. The screen lit up with a message preview that ended everything. It was a name I recognized, the same one I'd quietly obsessed over for weeks. The message was short. Last night was everything. I can't stop thinking about you. My hands went cold. I scrolled. More messages, photos, timestamps that lined up with the so-called work events and late-night meetings. Jokes. Flirting. Plans. It wasn't emotional cheating. It hadn't been for a while. This was real, physical, deliberate betrayal. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just stared at the screen like it was a foreign language I could still somehow read. Every gut feeling, every sleepless night, every little breadcrumb. It all made sense now. And it hurt in the exact way I feared it would. I put the phone back and sat on the edge of the bed, numb. They walked out of the bathroom smiling, making small talk like everything was fine. I said nothing. I just watched them dry their hair and pick out clothes for the day. Watching them move, knowing what I now knew, was like witnessing a stranger wear my partner's skin. I waited until the evening. I wanted to hear them lie to my face. They came home, kissed my cheek, asked what was for dinner. I asked how work was. They said busy, draining. I asked if they saw anyone after. Just grabbed drinks with a few people from the team. I pulled out their phone, handed it to them, and said, "So, this is nothing then?" They froze. Didn't even ask what I meant. Just stared. I repeated myself, louder this time. This whole thing. This is nothing? I could see the panic hit. The calculations forming behind their eyes. They opened their mouth and closed it again. Then, finally, "It's not what you think." That phrase, in that moment, broke something in me. I laughed. Not out of humor, but exhaustion. It's exactly what I think. So don't insult me. They tried to grab the phone. I pulled it back. I've seen enough. The lies came next. It didn't mean anything. It was just physical. We were going through a rough patch. You've been distant too. Excuse after excuse. But not once did they say they were sorry, not truly. Not in a way that sounded like remorse. They sounded more scared of getting caught than ashamed of what they'd done. I asked them how long it had been going on. They said 3 months. I knew it had been longer. I could feel it. I told them I didn't care about the timeline anymore. I asked if they loved the other person. They said, "I don't know." That stung more than a yes. That meant they weren't done. We stood in silence for what felt like an hour. I wasn't waiting for more answers. I was waiting to see if they'd ask me to stay. If they'd fight. If they'd fall apart. They didn't. Just stood there, defeated. Like I was already gone in their mind. Maybe I had been for a while. I packed a small bag. Not everything, just enough. I told them I needed space. They asked, "So that's it?" I nodded. I didn't owe them theatrics. I didn't owe them a breakdown. I walked out not because I didn't care, but because I finally cared about myself more than I cared about holding on to someone who didn't choose me. The next few days were strange. I stayed with a friend, ate very little, slept in waves, kept checking my phone out of habit, expecting texts that didn't come. When they finally did text, it was generic. "I'm sorry. Let me explain. We can fix this." But it was too late. The damage was deep and deliberate. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was the realization that I stayed too long. That I saw the signs and waited for confirmation like it would somehow make the pain more valid. That I bent over backwards to be enough for someone who was already slipping away. I played scenes over in my head. The mornings I made breakfast, the nights I planned dates, the times I tried to connect and got a blank stare in return. They weren't just cheating on me, they were erasing me in real time, and I let it happen. I thought about confronting the other person, messaging them, calling them out. But I didn't. Because this wasn't about them. They didn't make the promises. They didn't owe me loyalty. The betrayal was all on the one I loved. I blocked the number for a few days just to breathe. Then unblocked just in case something meaningful came through. It didn't. Just more vague apologies, offers to talk, desperate attempts to salvage the image of themselves more than the relationship. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Their silence in the weeks before spoke louder than any apology now. The worst part was mourning a version of them that never really existed. I wasn't grieving the person they were, I was grieving the person I believed they were. The version I built in my head. The partner who would never cheat, never lie, never look at someone else the way they once looked at me. I realized I had been in love with potential, with memories, with the illusion of loyalty. But reality had finally shown up, and it was ugly, unkind, and indifferent. There was no big fight, no begging, no late-night knock on the door asking me to come back. Just silence. And maybe that was the answer I needed. Maybe indifference was the closure. I stopped checking their socials, deleted old photos, put their things in a box, and I sat with the pain, not trying to escape it, just letting it exist. Because healing doesn't start with forgetting. It starts with facing the truth, even when it burns. And in that truth, I started finding the beginning of something else. Not hope, not yet, but the space for it, the possibility. Time moved slowly after I left. Each day felt unfamiliar, like waking up in someone else's life. The silence I once feared became comforting. No more pretending. No more tiptoeing around tension or trying to decode mixed signals. The air was clearer without lies in it. I didn't tell many people, just a couple of close friends. Most didn't ask why, it was written on my face. I wasn't angry anymore, just drained. The betrayal wasn't fresh now, but its weight still lingered in small, ordinary moments. A song we used to play, a restaurant we always ordered from, seeing couples laughing at nothing. I'd catch myself zoning out, remembering how much I settled, how much I tolerated, hoping love would circle back. I went through every phase, denial, sadness, flashes of rage, but mostly disappointment. Not just in them, but in myself. I kept thinking, I should have left earlier. I should have trusted my instincts. But when you love someone, truly, you build excuses as fast as they break your trust. You rationalize disrespect. You rewrite reality just to delay heartbreak. One day, I found an old video of us. From a vacation we took 2 years ago. We looked happy, arms around each other, bright smiles, inside jokes. I watched it 3 times. Not because I missed it, but because I wanted to study it. I wanted to see if the cracks were already there, hidden in our eyes. And they were. I just wasn't ready to see it back then. That's the cruel part. You think love protects you from betrayal. But sometimes, love is the very thing that blinds you to it. You hold on thinking loyalty means patience. But loyalty without reciprocity isn't noble, it's self-abandonment. I started therapy, not because of them, but because I didn't want to carry this bitterness forward. I didn't want the betrayal to become a filter over everything else. My therapist said something that stuck. You're not just grieving them, you're grieving the life you thought you'd have. And that was it. That's what hurt the most. The future I built in my mind. The idea of growing old with someone who checked out long before I noticed. They reached out again after a month. A long message. Apologies. Admitting they were selfish. Saying they missed me. That it was the biggest mistake of their life. I read it twice. I didn't reply. Because closure wasn't something they could give me. It was something I had to give myself. I already knew the truth, and I'd already survived it. The more distance I had, the more I saw things clearly. The manipulation. The gaslighting. The way they made me doubt myself for noticing things they were actively hiding. The way they turned their guilt into my overthinking. I used to think maybe I wasn't enough. But now I know it was never about me lacking. It was about them not being ready to love someone fully. I started rebuilding. Slowly. I went back to old hobbies. Met friends more often. Spent time alone. Not feeling lonely, but peaceful. I cleaned my space. Got rid of things that reminded me of them. I didn't want souvenirs from a lie. People kept asking if I was dating again. I wasn't. Not because I was broken, but because I was finally whole. I wanted to understand my own patterns. Why I stayed. Why I silenced myself to keep the peace. Healing wasn't just about moving on, it was about learning so I wouldn't repeat the same mistakes under a new name. I began to forgive, not them, but myself. For trusting too much. For seeing the best in someone who didn't earn it. For bending until I almost snapped. Forgiveness didn't mean it didn't hurt. It just meant I was done letting the hurt define me. There were nights when I missed the idea of us. Not them I didn't miss at all. But the version of them I once believed in. The future I thought we were building. The safety I imagined we had. But every time that ache came, I reminded myself of the truth. The messages. The lies. The silence. When I needed honesty. That grounded me. It took losing them to find parts of myself I had buried. My voice. My needs. My worth. I used to tiptoe around conflict, afraid they'd leave. But they left anyway, just in pieces. Quietly, while still holding my hand. Now, when people ask what happened, I just say, it didn't work out. And I leave it at that. Not because I'm hiding the truth, but because I no longer need validation for my pain. The truth is mine. And it taught me more than any apology ever could. I stopped hoping they'd change. Stopped fantasizing about closure. I realized the version of them that loved me no longer existed. Maybe never did. And I was done bargaining with ghosts. Sometimes, love ends without a clear line. Sometimes, it bleeds out slowly while you pretend not to notice. But once it's over, the clarity hits like sunlight after a storm. You see everything you once ignored. And then slowly you rebuild. Not because you need to prove anything, but because you owe yourself the peace you kept giving to someone else. And that's where I am now. Not healed completely, but healing. Not bitter. Just honest. I gave someone the best parts of me and they didn't know what to do with them. That's not my failure. That's just the truth. And finally, that truth doesn't hurt anymore. It just is.